welcome back on Light on Us. Today I have the pleasure to speak with Cory Endrulat. His project Nature is the Answer and his website Liberator.us. I hope everything was correct here. Welcome.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that you're doing this work. It's always nice to see another content creator putting out information that can really help a lot of people. And, I mean that because there's not a lot of people sharing this type of information with the public, whether that be about natural law, voluntarism, statism, and most of these terms that still most of the world never even heard of, right? And so it's just bringing that to the world to say, hey, here's this information that you don't know about and that the schools never taught you. Schools purposely don't teach you that can really empower you. And that's why so many people are creating content, because they're like empowered and it's changing their life. And I interviewed over 50 of them and they're like, oh my gosh, I was in this dark rabbit hole. I was consumed by the shadow and all of a sudden I was brought to the light, because that's what knowledge is. Brings us out of the darkness, empowers us.
Yeah.
And that is something politics can never do. That's something religion tries to do. But I think this information might be a great source of enlightenment for people without being stuck in a divide like a lot of those can be at times for people.
Yeah, indeed. One recent event was a friend of mine was like, wow, this dude, he break down the natural law seminar from Mark Passio 9 hours into I think it was 3 minutes. Was it 3 minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was, and he was like, wow, that's awesome. And I was like, yeah, I have the pleasure to speak with him. I'm so glad that that it will happen.
Thanks. Yeah, I
here
mean,
we are.
I had to break it down because, the 6-hour presentation is a good presentation for somebody who wants to invest the time and really learn. And I recommend everybody does. And eventually you really do at the end of the day. I mean, anything in life takes time, right? It takes practice. It takes effort to actually do something, to learn something, to have it change your life. So it's not something you can just get in 3 minutes. But the 3 minutes is meant to break it down in a way that's also simplistic. So that way when you do have a full understanding, you can be like, I can summarize it. I can bring it together. And I can also bring it together using terms that might be different from maybe the ways that other people talk about. So that's what I did within the 3 minutes. I didn't use the same exact terms. I didn't define what rights are necessarily. I didn't use even right language, like rights language. But yet I was still hitting the point home. I was still getting to the same conclusions. And I think that's key, is being able to understand there's different perspectives and ways and paths to get to the same road, to the same destination. And and it's not deceiving people to find different ways to find the truth, as long as you are sharing the truth, right? And there's different people, there's different cultures, there's different music, everybody has different interests, and so we can't be secluded to like one way of doing things or one image or one logo or one, there's got to be different methods of communication. And I'm always opening people's horizons to say, hey, there's different knowledge, here's different ideas. And that's how we open our minds and further empowerment. Because if you're going to learn knowledge to begin with, the first thing you have to start with is an open mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I very like your style, because you're very intuitive and you have your own stuff that you're working upon. I like that. It's very you feel the stuff that you talk about. There's a big heart in this guy.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It's very kind of you. Yeah, but honestly, it's just out of moral obligation for humanity and what I see needs to get done, at least, for a great part, and also just because I like to create content, and it's something that I've always done, and I refuse to gain any money off of it. Right? So it's not something I want to be like, all right, guys, donate and buy this and buy that. And I could absolutely do that. And people are like, why don't you ask for money on this and that? It's like, well, the thing is, it's a moral cause. Like I said to you before, it's like, not many people are doing this, and for a lot of people, some of the information could be like, "Whoa, what is this? Are you trying to are you going to sell me something at the end of this? Like, what? Why is this like 6 hours, or why is this 1 hour? Why
Who has the sales
why
page?
is this?
Yeah.
Where's this huge documentary? You put all this effort into it. There's got to be a sales pitch at the end, right? There's got to be something. No, it's like I'm producing it out of my heart. So I think maybe people aren't used to that necessarily because I'm not trying to divide them. I'm not trying to put them into a box. And that can actually be controversial because people sometimes like their boxes. People like being on one side or another side, and they don't like hearing opposite sides. And all I'm doing is shedding light on different ways of looking at the world. So, if you're right-winging, I'm sorry. If you're left-wing, I'm sorry. If you're libertarian, I'm sorry. It's like I'm going to probably offend all of you guys, but that's because it's like I don't have any labels. I don't have a box that I fit in. I mean, I'm in the One Great Work Network, right, with Mark Pasho and a bunch of other content creators. But even then, I talk about, well, the network can be a bad thing if we use that as a label. We say, hey, I'm part of this network and you're not in this network. And this is like a social club that I was invited to. And it can get dangerous from there, too. So I produce content. I'm more of like, I stay outside all these different groups, but being able to say, hey, I don't need to like separate myself from them, right? I don't, just because somebody is left-leaning or right-leaning or part of this or part of that doesn't mean I say, I'm not going to associate with them, or I shouldn't talk to them, or shouldn't attempt to just share ideas with them. I've gone to many different political groups. I've gone everywhere, and I talk to people because it's the people we're reaching, right? Like that's the goal, is to reach everybody in the world eventually. And why not do our best? I can just share ideas, ask questions, and I don't need to impose my worldview on them. They don't need to agree with me. I just share my ideas, and eventually maybe they'll start to understand, wait, okay, maybe he's got some truth to what he's saying. But I'm not trying to say, here's the agenda, this is what it is, and it must be the truth. Like, I'm open. If they have something that might be counter, that might be more truthful than what I'm saying, I'm ready. And because I'm there opening my eyes to new audiences, it also humbles myself into seeing, wait, am I truthful? I constantly question myself. Am I actually on the right path? Is voluntarism or true anarchy and some of these ideas that a lot of people might say is extreme and utopian, is it really utopian? Is it really extreme? Or really are people just fearful of freedom and they associate certain terms and certain ideologies with what they preconceive of it to be without actually inquiring if it actually is that? Like, there's a lot of people who use rights language, and they might be like, you need to restore your rights, but they say, okay, you need to restore your rights by signing this paperwork a certain way. And then there's other people who say, you need to restore your rights, and they say, oh, well, you just have to educate yourself, and you need to apply it in its action and behavior. They're two completely different methods of rights. So unless you talk to the person, you're not going to understand what they're saying, but a lot of people are quick to assume, oh, this is what they mean when they say rights. This is what they mean when they say natural law. Oh, this is what they mean when they say anarchy. It's like, you ever think about asking questions first before assuming what you think you know?
Yeah,
a lot of people like to make assumptions because, they're fed certain ideas through movies, through media. They read books. It's like, oh, yeah, I know it now. It's like, no, you probably don't, because there's a world full of mass information, and we barely know each other. I mean, we barely know ourselves or our world. We're constantly learning. There's always more to learn. There's always something different. For people to say, oh, it's all figured out already, that just destroys all scientific research or philosophical like inquiry into the universe. It's like the whole idea of philosophy or science is to keep looking and to find new things. And to say, yeah, that's why there is this thing, science and philosophy, because there is always new things. So, okay, anyways, redundant for me to say that, but it's important nonetheless, because the world can become very divisive and closed-minded at times. And I think a lot of people can feel that.
Yeah. That's the urge for freedom also, to express oneself and not be shut down instantly for being authentic in this world.
And to speak from personal experience, right? I mean, this is something we can do absolutely, which is why I did like those personal interviews where I was like, share your experience. How did you get to where you are now with understanding what you understand? And I might be curious about you, and you might want to share your experience now if you would like to. But like I was super like conservative in 2016. I fell right into politics, and I was like went to all these different
rallies,
speeches, and I wore like the T-shirt. I had like the water bottle. I was like super like, oh, I'm patriotic. I'm fighting for America. I'm fighting for the rights. Protecting our rights, and I gotta fight against the left. And it was like all the typical speaking points, and I never really looked at the other side's perspective. Nonetheless, I was stuck in one perspective, and that was the problem. So I wasn't able to see outside of that, but not just outside of it, but outside of all of it. It's like you're in a rabbit hole one way or another if you're in politics. And if you're maybe in politics for 10, 20, 30 years of your life, it's going to be really difficult to see outside of that. So it's actually easier sometimes to reach the youth, but then if the youth wakes up, it gives more of a reason for the older generation to be like, oh, look at this youth rebelling against us and taking down our traditional values. It's like each generation gives an excuse to the other. But frankly, both of them need to open their minds. Both of them need to open their hearts to each other because, again, like that is the problem. We're creating our own divides and we don't realize it. And these divides don't even come from ourselves authentically. They come from the movies or the media or from our schooling system. It's like if we did not get indoctrinated with the system that be, we would not even be talking about left versus right or this president and this declaration I hereby declare and this law. It's like this is all like made up. I would never think about this all on my own without that indoctrination. And that's just something you have to think about. Would you ever authentically in nature ever think about these things for yourself?
Yeah, that's the source. Yeah, exactly. Bring it back to the source through nature.
Yeah, and that's why nature is the answer is one of my main underlying messages, although some people might be quick to assume and say, oh, I just want to live among the trees and go in the forest. It's like, no, it's actually not that. It's actually realizing we'll lose our humanity if we don't recognize who we are, like knowing thyself. And that's like knowledge, it's education. It's not being primitive in the wild and hunting animals. And it's actually quite the opposite. But that still supports our nature and actually enables our nature to do much more than just be primitive animals. That's what we have in our capacity. So we're much more than what, again, another box people want to put us in. Like, this is our nature. It's like, no, clearly we designed all these things, towers and skyscrapers and books and media. I mean, this is insane, right? So it's something to be like, wow, we did this, but also at the same time, some of it is really destructive. And if we don't learn from that, then that's our fault, because it's our creations. If we can create it, we can equally destroy it.
Yeah. And it's also very important to destroy things from time to time that are bad for us.
Perfect example I usually use is slavery in the 1800s, chattel slavery in particular, and I talk about abolitionism, which is sort of like an idea I brought a bit more back to light with like my book Slavery Gone for Good, bring back a lot of the abolitionists and what they were saying in history. And this is very important because a lot of people are fearful of freedom, like I said before, in ways of saying, well, without government, without politics, who will pick the cotton? Who will build the roads, essentially? Yeah. The same arguments people made in the 1800s of, well, without slavery, how would society survive? And if we freed the slaves, things would be chaotic. And maybe there was some short-term turbulence because society was like, oh, what are we doing? And the slaves were like, oh, we're free. What do we do? But long-term, they knew that was right because what was right was what was right. Like, that's why the abolitionists said, end it now. Don't end it later. Don't make it better. Just end it now because it's wrong. And people were like, what do you mean? Like, it's right because it helps our economy. It's right because it's like, no, you're enslaving someone. You're justifying like the ends with the means for an end, basically. It's utilitarianism. Basically saying, well, just because this is wrong in the beginning, it makes it right in the end. So clearly it's good to do. It's like, no, enslaving someone is always wrong, period. And so if we start from the basis of always do right, never do wrong, that would be ideal, rather than, okay, do some wrong to maybe potentially achieve right, but it's kind of hard to quantify and know, but let's guarantee wrong. Like, no, that's just absurd.
Yeah.
But that's what the abolitionists were facing, a whole world of people who were like, yeah, well, slavery, I mean, come on, it's too hard to change the world. It's too hard to end what we've had for thousands of years. It's like, maybe it's not that hard once you actually realize, shoot, they're just human beings and they can be just like us. And they can actually help the economy be more productive by being just like us and being like human beings. And that's the thing. The world can, as a whole, will become more productive when people allow people to just be people and not slaves or kings or rulers over their lives. I mean, we see how the kings and rulers are living in, oh, I have all this great stuff, and they're doing nothing, and they have all this money, and they don't know what to do with it, and they're spending it on things that most people disagree with, and they're psychopaths, and they're doing all sorts of crazy things with their own bodies or with other people, and then they're doing these interbreeding mixes, and there's a bunch of weird practices that happen. And this is all public. I mean, people can access that information if they choose to, using the internet, right? But then you look at the other side of that, and it's like, then there's people who are living in poverty. I mean, it's like, it's like there's got to be some sort of middle ground here, where it's like you have these people who are really like in royalty, they have everything in the world, and yet they're not really producing anything. And then there's people who have nothing in the world, and it's not really producing good results either. So there is a middle ground there, and there's a middle ground for all these different topics. Like, people talk about borders and abortions, and it's like, what's the right position? It's like, does there need to be a right position? It's like, I think people are so fixated on having a set structure, an idea of like, this is how it must be, and that is part of the reason why there's so much division. So, you know, when it comes to these topics, it's like, do you realize maybe both sides are correct? Is that a possibility? It's like, well, how could that be, Cory? It's like, well, think about it. It's like, okay, I'm pro-life in the sense that I want people to live, but I'm also not anti-choice, because I want people to have the choice of what to do with their own body. So, like, for me to be anti-life or anti-choice, you see how that's sort of contradictive to my understanding of life. It's like, life comes with choice. Life comes with freedom. It's like, you can't ignore either one. But they see like one overrules the other. It's like, no, it comes both together. Like, you don't have your life without freedom. You can't live it. So, and freedom provides the ability of choice. So it's just funny to me how that works. And there's contradictions like that all over politics. Same thing with like borders, except that's even more obscure, because if you're talking about a border around a whole country, it's like, how could you measure that? How is that like property that you can actually obtain or responsibly own for yourself? It's like, here's this huge border and it overlies all of this earth, and it's like, you have to coordinate that with everybody who lives in that, all those territories, and then you're also like separating a huge part of the world. I mean, just think about how absurd that sounds. And then like, how many countries have been there before this one country who says this is the designated invisible line boundary? Yeah. It's like, there were certain Chinese empires that lasted for like 800 years. America's not even 300 years old. It's like, and there has been like hundreds of thousands of different empires and civilizations before the ones that currently thrive today. And they're not really thriving today. They all will fall exactly the same way those empires fell. The same exact way. And people don't realize that it's just history repeating over and over again, because people keep falling to their, oh, borders, oh, this law, oh, this politician. And it's all just divide and conquer. It's always been that. And then the people at the top are always the ones who keep succeeding. And this is why you always see, wait, okay, it's the same people in power, the same bloodlines that have always been in power, from this civilization to that civilization, funding this war, this side and that side. It's like, okay, now I see what's going on. They're just trying to make people happy or give them the illusion of freedom so they can maintain their power with their families. It's like, oh, that sounds great. They're keeping their family in charge. Yeah, at the expense of everyone else's family, at the expense of the human family. Like, I consider you and other people part of this work like part of my family, in the sense that you're doing something that is worth emulating. It's doing something that is inspiring, something that can help a lot of people. You have good intentions, perhaps. You know, you want to do good things. And that, to me, is like that humanity that could be missing from the society that says, wait, well, you know, being good or trying to achieve higher ideals, nah, we got to just keep working our 9 to 5 and just doing what society tells us to do, and ignore all that because it's too much work and too much effort, and let's just not pay attention to it. It's like, no, the abolitionists had to take time out of their lives, out of their work, to do a moral cause which everybody was opposed to because they knew it was right and they knew it would evolve humanity. And it did. And they are good examples of not just the truth to action, but bringing the truth to people, to a vast majority of the world that is really close to it after thousands of years. So, like, for people to say, whoa, we've always lived with government, it's like, well, yeah, we've always lived with slavery, but guess what? That was taken out of the picture. So if that one was taken out of the picture, who's to say all these other ones can't be taken out of the picture? Like anything else that might offend people, or things that might hurt humanity. I mean, it's really our choice of what we do on a collective level of many individuals partaking in certain actions.
Yeah. There was a lot of good stuff in there. It's sometimes the biggest problem with people is that they are very afraid of what might just happen to them, and then they will have not that much money, or there will be another system, and then, oh, I'm lacking this, maybe I will lack this, blah blah blah. And that's why it's very important to have this possibility to imagine new things, to do things differently. That's also like this. I was thinking about that, like in politics you have this conservative guys and liberal guys, and maybe the ones are the conservatives, you can say. Maybe in the beginning they were like, okay, we have rights and we want to keep that rights, and at some point it was pervaded into, okay, we need laws and we need to do a lot of other stuff. And the liberals was more like, okay, but we also need inventions, we need to do things differently, and they have a big battlefield on this, and there's no contradiction in it. You can have your rights and we still can do things differently that we're doing like we're doing at the moment.
Yeah. Being able to see that is important, but what you touched on was also very key. You said there's certain things people are like sort of holding on to, or they don't want to let go on, or like maybe safety and security or possessions that they're like, well, without the system, I might lose this, I might lose that. And it's fearful for them to that extent. Now, one thing I like to remind people on this end is not only do you have endless services in a free world. If we were to look at like, how would a free world operate with all its fancy machinery? It's like no one can really project the future and everything and how everything would work. But for sure, freedom provides possibility and therefore many different solutions. But one thing I could say on the philosophy end of it is, if you look at every philosopher in history, or at least most, worldly philosophies, especially coming from the East, a lot of it is oriented toward defeating desire or attachment, because your way to enlightenment or to true inner peace or freedom is getting away from those chains that you either create for yourself or other people impose upon you. But at the end of the day, you can free your own mind and soul, and when your soul is liberated, someone can take your body, throw you in a jail, but you're still free inside your own head. And this is why Gandhi was like, I'll willingly go to jail for his beliefs. So Gandhi's like, yeah, bring me to the jail and bring over all these other 7,000 people to the jails. We'll overwhelm the jails. You'll have too many people, too many supplies, and the state won't be able to operate. And then guess what? He got what he wanted without any violence. I did an article recently about this called Overwhelm the State. William H. Douglas wrote the article. I did a video about it, and I've wrote similar things to this too, and we collaborated. This is what we do for the Liberator too. And this is just one of the strategies. You can overwhelm the state. You can use nonviolent protests, kind of like Gandhi does. I'm not a huge fan of protests that much. I think there's many other ways that people can also educate others. But it's just something to keep in mind. It worked in history. Again, like the abolitionists, it worked in history. They didn't really do protests. All they did was like, let's set up societies and meetings all across the country, anti-slavery society meetings, and we'll talk about these ideas and we'll bring it to people. And actually, you know what? They were actually banned from going to certain places. Sounds a lot like today with content creators getting banned going on certain platforms. I mean, again, it's just history on repeat. The same thing with the anti-federalists who were like, man, if we pass this constitution in America, the government's only going to get bigger. Censored. And then, oh, well, here we are. The Constitution did nothing to prevent the government getting bigger. I guess these people who were censored were right. I wonder why they were censored. It's like, oh, maybe that's because they were actually sharing some sense of truth, or some of their concerns might have been actually quite valid. So just something to keep in mind is there's always people who are sharing the truth throughout history. It's just a matter of how much people really want to act on that and really share that to the public. And I think it's bound to reach the public. The more you try pushing it down, the more it's going to come back up. And this is what happens with addictions. So psychologically and philosophically, you can really connect desire and attachment with these types of things. If you're addicted to something, you say, oh, well, I'm just going to have one alcohol. Well, just one drink. It's like, no, you're going to have two. You're going to have three, and then you're going to have four, and you're going to have five. It's like, okay, I'm addicted to this thing called government. I think we need to have a government, right? But it's got to be limited. I'll just have like a small limited government, and it's going to grow, and it's going to get bigger, and it's going to get bigger, because you are allowing it in existence. If you allow it in existence, it's going to grow. You're saying, this is how I want to live my life. This is my philosophy. Your philosophy is essentially what you choose to live with your life. It's basically your actions. You know, we call action as wisdom. So like you can say that's your philosophy in a sense. Like, this is how I want to live my life. This is what I want to share with other people. Children best learn from example. Most people, if they hang out with other people, they tend to emulate their actions over time, even unconsciously. So yeah. Just something to bear in mind, which is why movies and the media can also be very influential. Even when someone's just sitting up there with a teleprompter acting all robotic and like, I'm looking all good and I need to look good in front of my audience and speak with a nice monotone voice. And you know, it's like I can't even emulate it because I'm just so free-spirited, because that's what humanity is. We're not meant to be like robotic in a sense, but then we try and we attempt, but it doesn't really last and people can see it. And that's why podcasts are now getting popular. That's why YouTubers and different content creators are getting popular, because they're more relatable to the average person. People are like, wow, you know, this is a human being. I'm not listening to a robot for once. So it's those subtle like psychological cues that people like to pick up on. And when they see someone who's like, wait, this person's happier than me and they're living with less possessions, it's like, wait, that's quite inspiring. You know, this person's happier than me and they're doing this completely different lifestyle. I mean, this is something worth knowing. It's like, why is that? So attachment and desire is definitely one of those things that like Buddhism talks about, Hinduism, Taoism, even Christianity, a lot of Western religions. If you look into it, it's like you follow your deity or the truth, and this overrides all human authority, or overrides all human possessions, materialism, all of it. And that is like your source of faith, or your source of hope in the world. You know, this is your light unto you, which you pray or have your internal practice for, your meditation. This is not something that requires a thing. It requires just your own mind and your own presence and your own breathing and your own attention given to the spirit of the world, right? So I think that's a powerful thing, because it's helping a lot of people. They find out, wait, I am in a world of materialism or consumerism. No wonder why when I take the time for myself, I'm starting to see not only more in my environment, I'm starting to see more of myself. And that gives them a greater connection to themselves and therefore to the world that they live in. And hence with the truth or the creator or or their religion. And that's why it can be so helpful for people, and why we shouldn't just shun out religion if we understand the value that it can serve for people. I'm not religious. I definitely don't practice a religion, but a lot of people might say what I just said and say, oh, well, I'm spiritual, or I'm a deist, or I'm a Taoist, or I'm something like that. But again, I don't really have a label either. So I'm really just practicing my presence. I'm finding out who I am, and I'm utilizing all these different practices. I'm finding out what is best. I'm learning from all these different cultures and different groups. Why not, right? These are all created for a reason. We now live in an ever-connected world. We're not detached from one another. Certain cultures only sticking to their own kind, saying mine is the only way. We have the world at our fingertips. We can download any book online. We can go to any podcast, watch any video. I mean, it's insane.
It's
So
crazy,
that talk about attachments. Like, how could you be attached if there's always something more to learn from? I mean, there's no need to be attached. There's tons of resources. You just be forever learning. But that's your choice. You could say, oh, well, I'm done now. I'm good. I have everything in the world. I know it all. It's like, you don't. And I think you'll figure that out eventually, because that's what happens is people like, I hold on to the string so long and it becomes my identity, especially content creators who make money off of it. It's like, well, this is my audience. Now I can't lose them. So I got to keep doing what I'm doing. And now they're stuck in such a rigid way of thinking, they'll never even escape it at all. Right? But their audience is going to start realizing, wait, this person is like too fanatical. They're too focused on this, and they're not being able to open their horizons or reach new audiences. So they'll be able, as an outsider, to see more that the insider doesn't see about themselves. That's why like a health coach or a practitioner tends to be helpful for an individual. So it's just being able to ask the right questions. If that person, however, took the time and presence away from their material things, away from their content creation, then they could see for themselves, wait, maybe I'm taking things a little bit too extreme, or I'm closing off certain people, I'm being a little divisive. But otherwise, they would never see it. And that's why all these people in politics, or these people who support slavery in a sense, I mean, they're never going to see that they do unless they take the time to really think about it away from what they've invested into. Like, that's how you're going to see outside of it, is being able to say, well, could I invest a little bit elsewhere for once, rather than all into my one basket that I threw in, you know?
Yeah. Attachment is a very big problem, but the world is a huge place with a lot of stuff to discover, and it will never end. As long as we're here, we're learning.
Right. It's like, if you're attached, you're holding on to the past as well. And that's why, like, when you are being able to be free, you're more present, because you're saying everything is constantly changing in the universe. Nothing stays the same. So there's no need to be attached. Like, there's a lot of things in my past that I'm like, wow, this is really cool. The environment, the music, I thought the world was better in general back then. And I still think that, because the music was better, the culture was better. Like, people generally, they weren't maybe as indoctrinated to some sense for certain things, right? Maybe people were on their phones less back then. And so there's a lot of things we might attribute and say that was really good back then. But it doesn't mean that we don't move on in the future. Eventually we have to realize, wait, this is our current reality. We have to face it head on and be like, yep, this is our current reality. And you can't go back to the past. You have to be able to move on in the future. Now, you can learn from the past, but you have to move on. You have to be able to stay present. And that could be really difficult. And that's why some of these, detachment practices can be really helpful. Clearing the mind, trying to get us focused and present.
Exactly. So to have both qualities, also the passive qualities and also the active qualities, that's very important to combine them. And then I think then people are whole when they combine those.
That's a good point. Your body does breathe by itself. If we're going to look at it in a passive sense, it breathes by itself. Most of this world will self-regulate by itself. Everything in nature self-organizes and regenerates. It's just a matter of if it's allowed to do so, because it really is good at doing that. But humanity is really good at being like, well, no, we shouldn't do this, and we got to put our footprint on this, and we got to change everybody else and make sure that they do this and do this. It's like using force and violence to make people good. It's like, is that really going to make people good? But this is the justification for all systems of control, be it slavery or government, one and the same, being that they basically were created with each other in Samaria or ancient Mesopotamia, as far as back as we can look at, and they've always been associated with each other. You know, I talked about the Fugitive Slave Law Act in the 1800s, basically saying, screw the abolitionists, we're going to recapture runaway slaves and we're going to re-enslave those who are now considered free. The abolitionists are like, oh my gosh, the government just like waged war on us. And like, but not only that, like, if it wasn't for the government saying, hey, slavery is a practice necessary for the economy and this is something that is like really helpful, and you know, we have the right to say if slavery should be legal or illegal, like, they're basically the head slave master. Like, determining, like, we get to determine who's a slave and who's not. We get to determine if slavery is legal, if slavery is not. It's like, wow, so government's above slavery. Wow. I wonder what they are then, you know? And that's the thing. They're basically playing God in this universe. They want to have control over everything that happens. So chattel slavery being one form, you have to question what is government. That's why I identified political slavery. But I wasn't the only person to identify political slavery, because I actually took that from the abolitionist. Lysander Spooner talked about political slavery exactly in those terms. And he said, a man does not become free just because he gets to choose a new master every couple years, right? Or, you know, just a band of robbers can get together and just call themselves government, and all of a sudden all of their theft is now legalized and right. No, it's not right. But just because they call themselves government, just because they call themselves authority, this is the whole premises of government. The whole premises of rulers. Everybody wants to look at all the symptoms and everything that comes from it. But the whole premises of government is this belief in authority. That goes completely overlooked, even by most libertarians or people who engage in political discussions. They never question that underlying belief system, ever. And maybe they'll mention statism, like, oh, like the power of the state, is it growing, or how much are humankind contributing to it? But they don't question still the belief system that everybody has, all of humankind, in authority. Like, not leaders, authority. Authority directly implies that it's something you have to follow. But what about your conscience? What about morality? Like, is that not something you have to follow? Would that not be authority? What about truth, or what we call natural law? Like, is that not also like an authority? Or so both of these coexist? They say, well, you have natural law, rights, and truth, and then you have man. It's like the famous quote, man cannot serve two masters. Which one are you picking here? Are you picking man to follow, or are you picking your conscience, truth, and morality? It's like, well, we need this person who lives millions of miles away to write down on the fancy piece of paper what's right. It's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Finding truth and evaluating truth and applying it in our own life directly, that makes sense. And then sharing it with others, and if the idea is so good, we educate others rather than impose it on them with violence. It's like, if your idea is so good, why is violence required? And if 1% of slavery is still slavery, it's still wrong. You know, and if 51% of people consent to slavery, it's still wrong, even though they're the majority. It's like simple concepts, really, to understand. But yet, the majority of people still engage in the practices that violate everything I just said. They support the majority. They support authority over their own conscience and belief systems, which is why World War II ever happened. And people were like, oh, well, I brought people to the concentration camps, but it's not my responsibility. It was the person who gave me the order. It's like, you carried out the order. You're the order follower. Why did you follow their orders? Because you perceive them to be authority as an order follower. That's why you're an order follower, because you're a follower of man. You're not a follower of truth or morality. If you were, you wouldn't be an order follower. You'd be actually quite the opposite. And you'd be seen as an outcast and a rebel and a criminal by society just for thinking for yourself, just for being a human being. Absurd, right? So this is like this is like government being God and saying, you're outcast from the world. You are no longer in reality because you decide to go against my judgment. It's like, you decide to go against God, so now you will be punished. Yeah. It's like, geez, this is what we create for ourselves. A religion that is greater than all religions, a system of control that's greater than all systems of control. And that's why if you end this beast, this elephant in the room that clearly is there because it's affecting people's lives and it's causing so many arguments and divisions and it's at the heart of everything, you can help the world tremendously. But people never, ever even consider the fact, like, it's possible to live without it. And it is. Like, it's totally possible for people to engage in voluntary behavior without, again, some scribbles on some people miles away so that you'd barely know. And even then, it's like, if you do know them, it's like, okay, it's a voluntary interaction. You consent to it. It's a contract maybe that you personally signed, but I never consented to the Constitution. Did you? Like, I never consented to my government. Did you? Like, we were just born into it. It's like not really fair for us. So I think this is part of the learning process for humanity, is realizing that's all illusion. It's nonsense. And that's it. Once you get past the illusion, if people are willing to do that with food and health, why aren't they willing to do that with politics? It's like, yeah, this food is unhealthy. It's an illusion. It's clearly not real. It's like not something that's going to make me healthy, so I'm going to change my diet. But what about your very own mindset, your own belief system upon the world? Does that not play an impact? I mean, we know the mind is more powerful than anything when it comes to health. If somebody says, hey, I want to be healthy, or hey, I am going to defeat this cancer, it can have tremendous effects. So something to consider on part of anybody who's listening to this, whether they're a practitioner or the average Joe or anything. I mean, we want to reach everybody if we think this information is truthful. We don't want to just reach the person who has all the dark experiences, who goes through the system and the system screws them over, like many people have, unfortunately. But we don't just want to reach them. You know, we want to reach the average person, the person who maybe has gone through barely any conflict. Like, I barely went through any conflict with the system. I never did drugs. I never did anything considered illegal, but I still go against the system. Why is that? Because I see the system inherently as immoral, inherently as a system that promotes all immorality and aggregates it in total. But how, Cory? Why? Because of the belief in authority. That's the very thing. It allows people to be exempt from everyday basic morality. It says violence is okay if it's done by authority. That's it. This belief system is really just that. And so if you believe that people have an authority to do this or do that, I mean, you're saying they get to be God. They get to be nature. So that basically summarizes the position and what we're bringing to the table here. And it's not, you're not going to see that anywhere else. Like, you go to most political interviews or whatever, and you're not going to hear that. You're not going to hear about spirituality. You're not going to hear about philosophy. You're not going to hear about everything we talked about. I mean, you might hear little bits here and there, but then at the end, it's going to be like, vote for me. Donate to my campaign. It's like, I'm not asking you to do anything except just look inside your own heart. Be a human being. But apparently that's really difficult to do.
Yeah. Maybe because there's a lot of pain in most of people and they don't want to look at it, and that's why they reinforcing it, because they don't want to look at it.
Well, because a lot of other people around them are in that illusion. So for them to see outside of the illusion, it's like, oh shoot, I'd be making enemies. And why make enemies of people? And I agree. Let's not make enemies of people. But who said we had to be enemies of people just because we think differently? See, this is the problem. This is the assumptions that people make. They assume in their own head, even if they don't speak it verbally, that just because they're against a lot of what society currently upholds, that society is going to ostracize them. Who cares what society thinks of you? Be yourself. Do your own thing. And you don't want to be enemies of everybody. Don't intentionally try to be enemies of everybody. Just do your thing. Be open. Try to find different ways to communicate. But you don't have to make life complicated just because you see things that other people don't. You know, it might seem naturally so, like, oh shoot, these people are in an illusion and they don't want to see what I see, and it might naturally get to the point where you just realize, yeah, I'm pretty different from who they are, but it doesn't mean that you feed into that, in a sense of saying, well, I'm going to be more different from who they are. I'm going to get tattoos. I'm going to start my own podcast. I'm going to do all this. I'm going to be the outcast. It's like, I'm going to go away from my family. It's like, no, you can still be with your family, even if they are totally conformist. How do you think they're going to get out of their conformity? How did you get out of your conformity? I likely start with a couple questions, some time, sitting down, really thinking about it. And so eventually, you being there, your presence, planting the seed, it can get to them. But if you just give up, they have no hope. They have no one to turn to. And they have no seed that can potentially sprout, that can go somewhere, especially depending on events in the world. Like COVID, for example, woke up so many people to what's going on in the world with like, oh shoot, we're being lied to, or there's things happening that we don't know about, or maybe not every narrative is what they say. And so 9/11, another good example. 2008, the bank crash, another example. The Great Depression, maybe in the 1920s, that goes even farther back. The abolitionists, I mean, they lived right after the American founding fathers. They saw things wrong in the system too. People see things, and that contributes to their awakening process. So give it time, as it did for yourself. Give it some time for yourself. And in fact, you're making it much easier in them because you're there as somebody who's done the work yourself. So when they're ready, you'll be able to speed up their process of recovery way quicker. It's like, oh yeah, I battled cancer. Now I can help you fight cancer as well. It's like, you got the tools with you. Now you can help everybody else around you. It's not going to be easy necessarily, because a lot of them might just want to say, hey, I want to go on chemo. I want to just do what I'm told. But you might be able to say, hey, well, I battled this myself, so I mean, why can't you? And just ask those questions and see what they say. And maybe they'll get really defensive, be like, oh, well, I can't do it. But that's a good sign, because it's a sign of, wait, you're actually trying to get through those barriers in their mind. Some conflict is necessary. You're not creating the conflict. You're just asking questions. And if they're creating the conflict, they expose themselves. That's why Gandhi's nonviolent resistance worked, by the way, because he would just sit there, and all the pain and suffering that he took, they were exposing themselves because he didn't fight back. He was just like, yeah, go ahead, do what you do, because you're going to show everybody else how much of a criminal you are by violently imposing your will on me. It shows the nature of the system for what it is, violence. Because if he fought back, they could have said, oh, look, he's fighting back, and look, he's a dangerous rebel, and that's why we need more order and peace and security. And they'll use that as a narrative, right? Another thing, obviously, they can add in agents and provocateurs and all sorts of things. That's always been existent. People say today, it's like, well, Gandhi and what he did can never be redone. It's like, yeah, it can be redone. There were always agents. There were always provocateurs. You know, that was not even 100 years ago, guys. Like, World War II was not even 100 years ago. That should alarm so many people.
Yeah.
So,
and people stop at some point. They stop. They're like, okay, at this point, there were no false flags anymore.
Right.
That's the magical barrier. I don't know how to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there might be a point in time where, you know, Gandhi's type of resistance might have to be utilized again. I would say, like, more directly in the way that he did it. But it could already be applied to a lot of strategies today. But like I said, there's also other strategies. So, you know, there's the overwhelming the state part, which is also a bit more complicated that goes alongside that. Because it's like you have to get tons of people arrested, and I'm not asking for people to get arrested, but that's just one of the things that worked throughout history too, like the Quakers did it. But more directly is what we're doing right now, educating people, putting out content, because we see how something can change overnight just from a trending hashtag, just from people talking about something. And then all of a sudden a huge conversation online sparks about it, and everybody's talking about this one thing, and now everybody's debating about it, and now it has no choice but to enter politics, and all the politicians are having to talk about it and see, you know, how they react to it, see how they face it. And this is what they deal with on an everyday basis of, it's like, oh, wait, this law was passed and it had counterintuitive results. I got to find a way to make myself look good. How do I make my identity look good so I don't look bad because what I said before was wrong? Got to figure this out. Right? So they're constantly trying to think of like, how could I deal with what is currently going on so I can make my attachment, my desire, fit what I want. And so the world is going to be battling with their own boundaries, and it always will. But every time they try to hold on, they'll never be able to truly hold on, which is why truth is amazing, and why if you go with the truth and you go with freedom, it's actually a beautiful force, because you don't have these chains on yourself. You don't feel tied up. You're not dividing with other people necessarily. So if you feel like you're dividing with other people because you have the truth, or you're sharing ideas of freedom, then you're maybe not sharing those ideas right. That's something I would suggest to people in like the truth movement community. Ask more questions. Be less imposing. Be less overwhelming on people who are totally new. And this goes for anybody really who thinks like they know what they know. It's like, maybe ask some questions. Maybe really just think about like, if you were in their shoes, would you want somebody just being like, you need to know this? It's like, no, not necessarily.
for some people that kind of stuff works. In my experience, it worked with Mark Passer because I know exactly why it worked on me. Because I had daddy issues and stuff, and I was like looking for that authority figure, and so I was easy to go for him. So that's one thing a lot of people also looking for like a real dad, and that's a problem also because they can fall easily for violence and other stuff that's not good for humanity.
Well, that's true, right? I mean, like, obviously, if I were to just ask questions here, it wouldn't even be like, we wouldn't even be having a conversation. It'd just be kind of weird. Like, I can ask you questions, but then it's like, okay, you're already pretty much on the same page as me. So I'd be asking questions to the audience, but the audience can't respond. So right now, I'm just speaking. Like, I'm saying basically, you must know this, you must know that. So I'm being more of like that father, like masculine, like, here's the action, right? But I'm saying there's different applications for that. So absolutely. I think what we see right now is like maybe more of that masculine application, but there's also room for the more feminine, open-minded, like, okay, what about this? What about that? Like Larkin Rose's Candles in the Dark seminar, where he teaches people, hey, this is how you open the conversation with people. Just ask them these challenging questions, see where they're at, start to sympathize with them, and find out their own contradictions with their own positions. And really, you're there with them. You're not like trying to impose anything. You're not going with an agenda. You're just saying, hey, I'm curious about what you believe. And if you believe what you believe, and if it's true, and what if I don't believe it? What do you want done with me? Like, if you want a certain tax passed, if you want a certain law passed, what about me if I don't want that passed? Like, that's it, right? That's pretty much the crux of it. And if you ask most people, it's like conservative or leftist or libertarians, like they're not going to want to admit like violence. They're not going to want to admit, oh, throw them in a cage for certain things. So they're just going to say, well, for the greater good and for order and security, they only say the good things and they leave out all the bad things. And the politician who goes on the stage who's like, we want to pass this and pass that, he doesn't say, we want to forcibly impose this on the public and under the threat of violence, because it sounds so much worse. But that's the honest truth of how it's actually going to get done.
Yeah. During COVID, they didn't say, well, now we're fucking up your lives to keep you safe. They didn't say that.
Yeah, no, they say it's quarantine to, prevent the bacteria, and it makes it sound like you are doing it yourself.
Yeah, we're caring for each other. Yeah, we're caring for each other. Yeah, it's
care
a big
for all people.
Yeah.
We collectivism, right? And that again, World War II. I mean, it's like we need to defeat communism. We need to do this. We need to do that. I mean, capitalism or communism or whatever it is, socialism at the time. I mean, it was just a battle of ideology. And look where it brought humanity. Nowhere, except death.
Yeah.
And I don't think we learned so much from that, because it's going to happen again if people don't realize how that started. People started worshiping authority figures, like millions of people saying this one person has power, or few people have power over their own lives, or that an ideology should be imposed on everyone without their consent, and just think about that. Did you ever consent to the systems that be? And would you consent with every interaction in your life? Like if somebody doesn't want you to do something, are you going to respect that of them? So why do we create an exception in politics? And if you think taxation is right, would you personally go over to your neighbor and steal his money, like yourself? And most people would not do it. So what makes it right for you to then hire some group of people or write it down on some piece of paper and say that's what makes it right to do? Doesn't change the nature of the action. It's the same action. You're taking money from people. That money belongs to them. Yeah. So, I mean, is what I'm saying really hard to understand? I think it's just maybe hard to digest in the face of the light of saying, oh, shoot, well, I was wrong. But that's it.
That's the biggest deal of it, yeah. I was wrong. That's the hard part.
Not collectivist, not we, I.
Yeah.
Because I makes up the we. And I is what actually matters here. Not that you're the only person that matters, but you're the only person who can change yourself.
Exactly. You're responsible for yourself and your actions and your stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. So did you have anything you wanted to talk about? Aside from that, do you want me to go a bit more into like the action or solution part of it?
Yeah, let's do that. I would
Because I
be
know I
very
mentioned
interested.
Gandhi. Yeah, yeah, and of course you can mention anything. Feel free to interrupt me anytime because I'm just like sometimes a little too much
I'm
out
really
there.
enjoying it, just listening to you. It's very nice.
Thank you. So Gandhi's like nonviolent resistance, right? I mean, that's obviously one strategy, overwhelming the state, another strategy, and then educating people, another strategy. But what about, is there anything else? There's got to be more. Well, yeah, there is actually, because politics is actually very limited as to what you can do. Like, you just vote for
Yeah.
someone, you just put your little check mark here. I'm done. I did all the work I needed to do. There's no more work that needs to be done, humanity. It's like, oh, I ran for office. I'm doing my duty for the people. It's like, the word educate literally comes from educere, which means to lead and to bring out of ignorance. Both of those, to lead and to bring out of ignorance, to lead out of ignorance, maybe you want to say. And if you look up leadership, I think the Tao Te Ching is a good book about that, older than the Bible. It talks about leadership and talks about how real leaders are actually among the people. They're not necessarily always in the front, but they're worth emulating, and the people don't even recognize they exist because the people are basically one with the leader. They like the fact that the leader is like them. And that's why politicians use all sorts of strategies to say we and stuff like that to sort of make it sound like they're part of the people. They use all sorts of psychological cues. They have a sun behind them in certain pictures, right? Makes them look like a religious figure with certain lighting. I mean, you'd be amazed to see some of the strategies that the systems have used for thousands of years to get people on their side. Certain colors, certain symbols. Obviously, the Nazi symbol was a very big occult symbol that was used for thousands of years. Again, not something to ignore. Who talks about that side of things? The occult and deep psychology. Carl Jung, a psychologist, and Mark Passio, and the occultist, and Satanist, but like not the average person. And so when they're exposed to the ideas or the icons, yeah, they can be manipulated in ways they don't understand. So anyways, aside from that, you want to use your own symbols or your own icons or symbols that you know can be helpful for people, and realize the symbols that they use so you can sort of deprogram people from the programming that they put on people. Because once you understand the programming that was put on people, you can then understand how to take them out. That's part of it, right? Again, like part of the education, part of all these efforts. And I would say a lot of these are sort of integrated, or you can use multiple efforts at once. So another action that I have, like that's very practical, that anybody can get involved with right now, is called the Liberator 2. The Liberator 2 is the liberator.us. You mentioned that in the very beginning. And that's a website where anybody can send their like Freedom server, Telegram, Discord, whatever it is. And you can share it with people. You can join other people's groups. You can share your ideas. You can share your videos. You can network amongst each other. And you can take a quiz on the website. You can share your activism. You can share your events. You can get involved. There's live streams as well. There's Truth Music in case you like to produce music or you like to maybe learn through music, because everybody has a different way of learning. And that's also something to also keep in mind. But on the Liberator 2, you can also send an article. You can practice writing. And then I'll turn that into a video for you, or I'll add it into videos or newspaper editions, etc. Because I actually make a newspaper from whatever people send in, and that can get printed every single week. Whether as individual articles or as a whole edition. So this is like not only bringing back the past methods of education, but bringing it into the future with using technology as like this new medium. So this is something that can be very effective, because now you're getting out the message in multiple different formats. And not only that, but you're getting help in doing so in case you're very new to it. And writing is something that can be very helpful. Just getting used to writing, especially if you're passionate about something and you want to organize your thoughts. I would highly recommend writing for people. I mean, even just journaling about yourself, I think, is practicing writing. And that's how I got better with writing, was just starting a journal and writing down my thoughts and thinking about different things and getting more organized. That allowed me to speak as I do now. So like just me doing that on my own. The school system did not teach me how to write down my own thoughts necessarily. They maybe taught me how to do basic writing. That was like very beginning ages. But then later on, they made me write about things I didn't want to write about subjects I didn't want to read about. And that was not something I was interested in. And so it kind of made me not want to write. But once I started writing about things I started to care about, okay, now I want to write more. Now I want to produce more. And this is the key, because this is how you keep your humanity and get more in touch with yourself. Now you're inquiring more into your own belief system. You're taking the time set to be more present, which is why reading and writing helps people, which is why they say it makes people smarter and all this other stuff, right? So this is something that could be so helpful for people. And if you just write a little bit each day, you can then send it in maybe a little bit each week. Send it in, I'll turn into a video for you. Or if you have any questions about video production, I'm willing to help you. There's a bunch of other people in this community who'd be willing to help you, I'm sure. There's tons of people who are now getting involved, including yourself, right? So there's so much that could be done just among online education. I've done shorts recently, TikToks, just 1 minute reels, a 1 minute video. They do the best. They do better than stinking 9 hours, 10 hours. You can put all the work in the world to like a masterpiece and no one will watch it, but they'll rather watch a 1 minute video that you put barely any effort and time into. That's the truth. So, explore your different methods of communication. Some people, they got famous from just reacting to videos online or compiling videos together into a documentary, maybe just making a reaction or compilation channel full of clips of different content creators. That's something I want people to do for a long time, because I know it'll be very popular if somebody does that. Just compile clips from different content creators or whatever. I mean, there's tons of channels that do that. Basically just stealing other people's content. But that's literally the internet as a whole. The internet and AI basically is fed and breeds off of stealing content. So that's why people are now writing essays with AI. It's like, how did AI get this information? Because it collected a bunch of data sources in order to produce it. So pretty much everything's copyright at this point. Not saying people should plagiarize, still be mindful of other people, of course. I'm just saying that realize that we actually want our content to get out there. I want you to copy my content. Like, these are ideas that can help change the world. So by all means, share that with people. So something that you can do absolutely practically, learn the technological skills, because we live in the age of technology. So we can't just ignore it. Right? Now, you don't have to learn those tech skills or do one way or another way. Explore and think what's different, what's new, what hasn't been done. Use your own creative input, your own art, your own way of doing things. That can be really helpful. So those would be, like, I'd say the main impactful things to do, because education and changing the mind is ultimately what changes our reality. So if you can educate people, that is really the only solution. Leo Tolstoy understood this. The abolitionists understood this. You couldn't just pass a law to change people's minds. And again, passing a law would still legitimize the state and government, which is counterintuitive. It still legitimizes a higher master. And that's not a master that we serve if we serve God or nature or truth or morality. So if we want to actually be in it for truth or morality, we have to educate people directly. And this is also being among our fellow people and not saying we're higher or lesser than anybody else. This is real leadership, in short. So that's it. Basically, as a brief summary of action, of course, I create a summit. That's another thing you can do. I made a tutorial for that on my channel. If anybody wants to create a summit like I did, very simple. You just make some schedules with different people, interviews, and you say, hey, I'm going to set up this huge event, and then boom, a bunch of people start signing up for your event, and you get free promotion and advertising from all the content creators that you invited on. The more you collaborate with other people and the more you bring things together, be it information or people, the more impact you'll make overall. And you see this across a lot of content creators. If they're just in one family or in a certain circle of other influencers, they're basically born into popularity. They're born into fame because they have the environment set up for them to automatically become famous. That's why a lot of them also fail at being famous, and they end up with a bunch of controversy because they were born into it, so they never got there authentically on their own. But that being said, I'm just saying this is how you make more of an impact, right? Obviously taking more time to stay present, and like I said before, that will help you humble yourself and understand more about yourself, which is what a lot of these content creators are really realizing. They're like, oh shoot, I'm being someone I'm not, and I have to like maybe take a time away from the internet. So be sure to always check in with yourself in this process. Don't get too overwhelmed. Don't get too like in all the rabbit holes, because if you're consuming, you're not always producing. Like if you want to be a producer, you want to be productive, Can't be consuming all the time. Now, you can consume a little bit if it helps your productivity, but if it goes beyond that and it actually interferes with your productivity, then it's no longer really serving you, right? So just something to consider among that. So hopefully that summarizes pretty well. I created Nature is the Answer, a movement, NITA.one, NITA.one, which is a website that people can share if they want to use a movement to also share ideas, because that can be also influential. I don't push it too often because I'm not a fan of like saying, use this flag and use this identity and make this who you are. But it's just something that can help if everybody had, for example, NITA.one on their website, on their links, on their descriptions. Because if everybody had one unified message, it would help the message get to way more people. Now, unfortunately, not a lot of people do that. Even though I've talked about it for a couple years, even just in our community space and creator space, not a lot of people have done that. But that's why I create these other projects, because I feel like maybe it's because there's not enough effort or personal collaboration inside of it. So like the Liberator 2, if you put in your own article, of course you're going to want to share it. But NITA.one, because you're not putting anything of your own into it, you might not feel as invested. You may not feel like you want to share it yourself. So I feel like the Liberator 2 has some advantages over that. And they're both doing the same thing. They're both educating people. They're both bringing the message to people. And that's all that matters. So choose what you want to use. You could, of course, take the NITA.one flag and customize it, make your own logos. Feel free. But look into the information first. If you're new to all this stuff, action comes second. Learning the knowledge comes first. But then once you have some of this knowledge, you understand, okay, this is what's going on, and maybe you vibe with it. You know, I'm not going to say that you do, but maybe you understand it and you're like, okay, I see where they're coming from. Then you could say, okay, maybe I'll start sharing around the flag or the website, or write an article, or think about sharing some of the ideas. It's more than just sharing a video. It's more than just sharing like one thing that's temporary or set in time. Like having a movement is something that can last forever. Having a flag is something you have in real life. Having get-togethers in societies like the abolitionists did is something you have in real life. So these are more effective strategies that can create real-world practical change, in my opinion. So action is more opinionated, of course, because you're going to have so many different strategies of going about the truth. But the truth we have to stay grounded on and principled in. And as long as we're moving in that direction, and as long as we make some progress, progress is progress. Right? So that's another way of looking at it too. You might be like, oh, I only have like 10 subscribers on my channel, only 20. It's like, relax. For so long on my channel, I had like not even 5 views per video. Now I'm at like 100 views at least per every video I put out every single day, because I just, over time, constant persistence and constantly doing it, it got there. But if you didn't have that persistence and constantly, being careful of the guidelines and the terms of service of the platform you choose to be on, and then being sure to utilize different strategies and see how could I improve. Like if you look at all those things and you keep your persistence, you will inevitably grow. You can't fall. You can only grow. So just something to know. So hopefully that summarizes everything. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, whether it be you, Jonathan, or anybody else who's watching.
Yeah, I think we're good for today. That was amazing, really amazing. I liked it. Lots of good stuff.
That's great.
I think I will also rewatch it to take it in more deeply. Also for my project, more new ideas, and that's why we're doing this kind of stuff. So also to influence each other, not just like I'm telling the truth and you take it. Nah, it's always like, okay, it's like having an accountability partner. I think you call it like that. Mm-hmm. Always like check in and check with other people and put it to practice what you know.
Yeah, for sure. You need that accountability in your life. You always need someone there who can ask you questions or be honest with you. So I'm always going to be honest with people, even if I'm like, oh, shoot, you got to change that thumbnail. You got to change that title. Make it look professional. I tell some people in our community, I'm like, change that thumbnail. Make it look something cool, Put some effort into it at least. Just make your own thumbnail at least, Don't just have like a default thumbnail. But if you put so much effort into the video, put effort into the thumbnail and the title too. Don't forget it. Right? So certain things like that can make a big difference.
Yeah. visuals are very important for people. Yeah, people will go for that. Yeah, and then they will go deeper. But that's sometimes the gatekeeper for people. Oh, look at nice. Is it appealing to me? Yeah, and then I will watch the thing, or I will give it a try.
Right.
So, thank you very much for everything today. It would be very nice if you can repeat all your social media, where people can find your stuff, what people should check out of your content.
Okay, yeah. Sure. The Liberator.us is the main one I would refer people to, since they can get directly involved. When it comes to my own content creation, I always have it separate from like these projects I set up for everybody, because I want everybody to get involved in like these projects, so it's not just about me. But my own links separate from that then would be taplink.cc/CoryHealth. Okay, so that has all my links. Okay? But otherwise, just look up Cory, Nature is the Answer, on any platform, whether it be Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Brighttown, whatever, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I mean, TikTok, it's Natural Law Teacher. But I don't plan to post there that often. But, you know, I tend to use a lot of these different platforms. So you'll find me on pretty much all of them. Just got to know the right handle. Most of the time, it's just Cory, Nature is the Answer. So thank you very much, Jonathan, for inviting me and having me on to speak about these different ideas, and action-oriented, of course, and getting people to think a little bit differently, which is always my goal. That's pretty much it.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot. Until then, bye-bye.